So I began the long bureaucratic process of becoming a conscious objector about the 4th or 5th month that I was in Iraq. It consists of writing a series of essays, ultimately sitting across the table from a captain and having a philosophy debate with him about my beliefs. He asked me, would I fight Hitler, and what would the Buddha say about upholding one's commitments? Actually, he was very fair in his investigation. All these notes, and also without my flak vest, since the Army confiscated the plates of my body armor, I think it's kind of a lesson or a means to teach me to know my place. So after 6 months in the South, our whole unit was redeployed north to Abu Ghraib prison. Let me just skip to right here. There we go. The move north was a tremendous blow to our unit's morale because we had been told that we were only going to spend 6 months in Iraq, that we'd be home by the 4th of July. So we were all packed up and ready to go, all poised to go home to America, and then they said, I'm sorry, actually you've been extended, and you're going to have to do another 6 months, and you're going to move up to Baghdad. So our unit morale was just devastated. We packed up our equipment and headed north. Along the way, we passed the Arches of Victory, which was a monument built by Saddam Hussein. It's actually a pretty grisly monument. At the base of the scimitars, there's a cornucopia spilling out helmets. And each one of the helmets has a bullet hole or a fragment hole in it. And they're all taken from the bodies of Iranian soldiers that were killed in the Iran-Iraq War, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century that nobody knows about. So it's actually a very grisly monument to Saddam Hussein, and a little more concrete proof, if you ever needed it, that Saddam Hussein was a bad guy. Every photo I took of myself in Iraq came out crazy. I was incapable of taking a decent photo of myself. This was me outside one of Saddam's palaces in Baghdad on the way north to Abu Ghraib. This is Abu Ghraib prison, which you can not see because it's very dark. This is the big show. Abu Ghraib had been infamous under Saddam Hussein as essentially a death camp where some 30,000 Iraqis had met their fate. It was soon to become infamous under us. Here in the north, things were on a completely different scale in the south. Instead of a few hundred prisoners, we had between 4,000 and 6,000 prisoners. You can see around the edge of the screen the curtain wall that went several kilometers around the Abu Ghraib complex. On the left side, there are rows of razor wire that formed the divisions where we held the prisoners. This was our barracks area. When we arrived at Abu Ghraib, the halls were choked with debris. Most of the buildings were ruined. There was no power grid. And we had to spend months repairing it and getting it in order before we could actually move in and take it over. It took us about a month to get light and heat. It was actually really cold there. And then ultimately, we got electricity, and then we were living large. Contrary to what you might think, most of the U.S. soldiers lived inside in the prison cells, and most of the Iraqi prisoners lived outside in canvas tents. So we lived in this prison cell, the 5 of us, and it was actually a huge improvement, and we loved it. Eventually, when we had heat and electricity, we couldn't have wished for more. But the best part of it was that the walls were made out of solid concrete and cinder block. So they provided good protection against mortar bombardment, which was one of the main hazards at Abu Ghraib. This is the hallway where I live with my buddies. This is a view of the Abu Ghraib prison camp itself. On the right side, you can see the prisoner living area. On the left, you can see our processing area and a group of prisoners being brought in. This is a view down from a guard tower into one of the prison compounds. They were divided into 8 large compounds called the Gansi compounds. We had about 60 to 80 prisoners per tent, per canvas tent, on a wooden floor, so very overcrowded. We had a tremendous problem supplying the prisoners with cold weather clothing and blankets. The temperature actually dropped below freezing while I was in there, and I had never thought Iraq was going to be cold. So I'd sent home all my cold weather clothing, and I came to regret it bitterly, but not as much as the prisoners did. In addition, we had a huge problem with communicable diseases from the overcrowding. The food that we brought in from Baghdad would often be rotting or would have rats in it, so the prisoners became ill, and we had big outbreaks of dysentery. In addition, tuberculosis was rife in the prison. If people didn't have tuberculosis when they came in, they soon did from being in a tent with 60 to 80 other guys. In fact, 15 members of my unit came home TB positive from close interaction with the prisoners. This is another view from a guard tower down into the prison yard. You can see the pools, the open water, some of the sewage, the debris. In the South, I had worked as a translator and a mechanic. In the North, I was transferred to Abu Ghraib prison headquarters to work for General Karpinski and her staff as kind of a officer's valet, radio guy, paperwork. And so there, working in the headquarters, I got a good chance to see the inner workings of the operation and what was going on. And the more I saw of Abu Ghraib and its operation, the less I agreed with it. I looked out at the prison yard and I thought, this does not meet the Army standard. You know, in the Army, we like to think of everything as squared away and clean and neat and orderly. And as Americans, we like to think that all our facilities are the best, and we give everybody the best treatment. And I became convinced that if the American populace could see what our prison camp looked like, they would never accept it, that this didn't look like a sanitary facility for prisoners. But initially, I was almost ambivalent to it, because I said, well, okay, the living conditions are bad, the food's bad, the health is bad, but aren't these really bad people? Aren't these the worst people in Iraq, the killers, the enemy soldiers? But working in the headquarters, I actually got a chance to find out differently. I did the rap sheet for prisoners coming in. So I looked through all their records of why they were in Abu Ghraib. And as I went through page after page, I saw petty theft, public drunkenness, forged coalition documents. It turned out that a large percentage of the prisoners in Abu Ghraib had not been captured in combat operations. They were civilian criminals from the Iraqi justice system. Since the Iraqi justice system had no working prisons, their civilian criminals would be sent to Abu Ghraib alongside some real murderers, real terrorists, real insurgents. In addition, the majority of the prisoners in Abu Ghraib were guilty of no crime at all. And I know that sounds outrageous, so I encourage you not to believe me, but to look it up in the Taguba report, in the 2003 International Red Cross report, and in the Schlesinger and Jay reports. General Karpinski herself, the commanding general of Abu Ghraib, estimated that 65 to 75% of the prisoners in Abu Ghraib had been arrested by mistake. That is, when a bomb went off, when a mortar shell was fired, we would send soldiers into the area, sweep up all the men there, maybe between 15 and 50, take them into Abu Ghraib for questioning. Once they were inside Abu Ghraib, the release process was so bureaucratic that it would often take 6 months to a year for prisoners to be released. So the prison quickly swelled with these people who'd been brought in for questioning, who were known to be innocent or suspected to be innocent, but were nevertheless trapped. And again, please look it up. That's from General Karpinski in the Taguba report. The 2003 International Red Cross report estimates that 80 to 90% of the prisoners in Abu Ghraib had been arrested by mistake. So once I found out who these prisoners were and what they were in for, I found it impossible to square that knowledge with the treatment they were receiving. I was passingly familiar with the Geneva Conventions, and I began to suspect that maybe this was not upholding all our standards under the Geneva Conventions. In addition to the living conditions, the relation between the prisoners and the guards was uniformly very rough and very harsh. I understand that U.S. prisons are no cakewalk, and I'm sure the culture there is extremely brutal. Imagine U.S. prison culture transplanted to Iraq with the added aggravation of the soldiers not speaking the same language as the prisoners, and then all the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bigotry that had grown out of 9/11. So as a result, many of the prisoners were injured in altercations with the guards, ultimately rising to the level of abuse that we all saw on CNN with the hooded prisoner and all that, which occurred around the same time. Unlike the South, the northern part of Iraq was a combat hot zone. We were under continual mortar bombardment from the outside. This is a blast crater. Because Abu Ghraib was situated between two main highways on the way to Baghdad, it was easy for Iraqis to drive by in a truck, lob a few mortar rounds into the base, and drive away before we could respond. So every night, like clockwork, the bombardment would begin. We'd hear the first shell fall, the alarm would go up, we'd put on our helmets, our flak vests, and take cover, wait for the bombardment to end. It wasn't a tremendous danger to U.S. soldiers because we had a lot of armor and we had places to hide, we had shelters. So as far as I know, only 2 U.S. soldiers were killed by bombardment while I was there.